A pale, argent mist clung to the surface of the bay as dawn's first tendrils of light began to push back the inky blue of night. The coastal town of Sea Haven lay quiet under a low-hanging sky, the cry of a lone gull echoing across empty streets and deserted piers. Along the beach, a small team of lifeguards and rescue volunteers assembled, their breath steaming in the chill air. They moved with the practiced precision of a crew about to begin a routine inspection, checking emergency gear, testing radios, and sipping strong black coffee from battered thermoses. But among them strode a different kind of guardian. Kai, the 5-year-old Labrador, his golden coat dulled by wet sand and dew. From the moment Kai set paw on the dune grass, his entire being thrummed with eager alertness. His nose, wet and glistening, quivered as it sifted the tang of salt water and the faintest, most elusive scents carried on the breeze. His golden eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the horizon where dark swells gave way to sky. Lifeguard Captain Marcus Bennett stood beside him, clipboard in hand, ticking off items on the morning checklist. And yet even Marcus glanced at Kai with an unspoken respect. This was no ordinary pet. Kai was trained for water rescues and shoreline safety. But beneath that training lay instincts older and deeper than any human protocol. At 5:45 a.m., as Marcus called out the time, Kai's ears pricked. The world seemed to slow. The surf lullaby changed its rhythm, the swell growing longer, rolling in from farther out at intervals that felt too steady, too deliberate. Marcus paused mid-sentence, his pen hovering over the list. A faint vibration hummed beneath Kai's paws, a whisper of movement in the earth, like distant thunder borne across the seabed. He lifted one forepaw, then another, tilting his head toward the open water, as though listening to a secret song. Kai's reaction was instantaneous and undeniable. He crouched low and began to sniff the air in earnest, dragging his muzzle through the sands closer to the waterline. Then he bolted sideways, sketching a sharp arc, paused digging into the wet beach, and skidded to a halt before the rocky outcrop near the old lighthouse. His tail stiffened, hairs bristling as he stared intently at the sea. His body quivered with adrenaline, not playful but purposeful, driven by an intuition so primal it transcended training. "Easy, boy," Marcus murmured, but even his voice betrayed tightness. He holstered his pen and unclipped a handheld radio from his belt. "Alpha Team, status check. We might have movement offshore." He keyed the mic, voice low yet urgent. Behind him, the rest of the crew formed a loose semicircle, eyes following Kai's rigid posture. They peered at the horizon, where each incoming wave now rose higher before crashing, the crests darkening ominously. Kai's nose twitched again, and he took a deliberate step toward the water, paws leaving deep impressions. He emitted a soft, warning whine, subtle, mournful, but with an unmistakable edge of alarm. Marcus exchanged a glance with lifeguard Lauren Vega, whose binoculars were already raised to her eyes. She studied the distant breakers, counting heartbeats between the swells. "Those aren't ordinary waves," she reported, voice tight. "They're longer period swells, coming from the southwest." Kai barked once, sharp, urgent, then lunged forward, halting only when his chest pressed against Marcus's leg. He looked up, gaze locked, as if begging Marcus to understand. Something extraordinary, something dangerous, was unfolding beneath the surface. The radio crackled with the arrival of more voices. Word was out. The buoy network further offshore had registered a sudden shift in water pressure, an underwater disturbance, likely an earthquake epicenter, several dozen kilometers away. The crew moved swiftly into action. Marcus lifted Kai's leash and clipped it firmly, then turned to the others. "All right, evac routes," he called. "Beaches off limits. Close access points and warn the patrol boats. And get everyone out of the water now!" Lifeguards fanned out, sprinting toward the wooden boardwalk and the dune entrances where early joggers and families were beginning to stream in. Someone flipped the switch to the coastline siren, unleashing a keening wail that echoed off the cliffs. Kai strained against his leash, eager to lead the charge. His eyes darted between the retreating waves and the figures behind the dunes. He barked again, this time repeatedly, each bark punctuating the urgency of his warning. Marcus crouched, placing a hand on Kai's head. "Good boy. Lead the way." Guided by instinct, Kai bounded back toward the water's edge, sniffing the air and then turning sharply inland, as if ensuring the shoreline was clear. The crew fell into step behind him, trusting the dog's uncanny sensitivity to the sea's hidden rhythms. By 6 o'clock, the beach was largely deserted. Colorful umbrellas lay abandoned in the sand, and a dozen surfboards bobbed harmlessly near the shore until volunteers hauled them in. Kai continued his patrol along the waterline, ears perked, muscles coiled for any sign of change. Above, pelicans circled in confused patterns, their usual fishing dive replaced by uneasy circling. Even the wind felt wary, its gentle sigh now carrying a note of foreboding. As Marcus watched Kai's silhouette against the rising sun, a profound respect washed over him. For the Labrador's loyalty, for his own team's seamless execution, and for the delicate balance between humans and the natural world they sought to navigate. Here, on this stretch of sand and surf, training met instinct, and the brave heart of one fearless pup became the town's first, and perhaps most vital, alarm against the ocean's unseen fury. And so, with every careful step along the damp, shifting sands, Kai maintained his vigil, undaunted, unwavering, ready to face whatever wave came next. A restless hush settled over Sea Haven in the hour between dawn and sunrise, as if the entire town held its breath. The shoreline, once alive with morning routines, now lay deserted, scattered footprints and abandoned beach towels, the only reminders of hastily vacated plans. Above the cliffs, the gulls circled in tight, uneasy loops, their sharp cries echoing across the empty boardwalk. Farther out, the sea's surface rippled with odd, languid undulations, each crest rising higher and lingering longer before finally collapsing in a muted crash. Kai padded along the water's edge, nose low to the ground, ears swiveling like radar dishes. His leash was slack in Marcus's hand, yet the dog moved with a purpose all his own, sniffing for the faintest hint of change. Occasionally he would pause, head tilted, eyes locked on the distant horizon as though trying to decipher a secret written in the motion of the waves. The lifeguard crew followed warily, trusting Kai's instincts more than any instrument. Lauren Vega jogged beside them, scanning her handheld tablet for updates from the offshore buoys. "Wave intervals are stretching to 15 minutes now," she reported, voice tight. "And that last swell peaked at nearly 2 meters before breaking." She scrolled through the data feed. Seismographs showing weak tremors, too. Magnitude 6.2, about 90 kilometers southwest of here. Marcus grimaced. "That's close enough to worry about a secondary wave pattern." He glanced at Kai, whose tail flicked once in acknowledgement. "Keep everyone away. No one goes back on the beach until we know it's safe." They reached the foot of the old lighthouse, its whitewashed walls streaked with salt and time. From this vantage point, the cliffs curved gently around a small cove, its rocky bottom visible in the shallows. Kai stopped at the precipice, his body rigid. He emitted a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the concrete. The other dogs in the training program, 2 German shepherds and a spaniel, were normally fearless, but today they lay huddled at a distance, casting uneasy glances at Kai's stiff posture. "Looks like Kai's picked up something else," Marcus whispered. He crouched beside the Labrador, hand resting lightly on his back. "Show us." Kai lunged forward and bounded down the steep stone steps that led to the rocky cove. Before Marcus could call him back, the dog was scrambling over barnacle-encrusted boulders, avoiding pools of cold seawater that gathered in the crevices. His paw prints traced a zigzag line across the rocks until he stood at the water's lip, mere inches from the breakers. Marcus and Lauren followed, hearts pounding. The wind had shifted to a more insistent gust, carrying with it an electric tang that set hairs on end. As they drew near, Kai's ears flattened, and he emitted a series of low, almost human-like whines. He planted his front paws on a jutting rock and strained his body forward, gaze locked on the churning sea. Lauren raised her binoculars. I can't see anything unusual up top," she said after a long moment, lowering them with a frown. But look here." She pointed to a dark line beneath the surface, about 40 meters offshore. "That could just be seaweed, but it's moving, like a shadow sliding under the waves." Marcus knelt beside Kai. "Ah, good boy," he murmured softly, scratching behind the dog's ear. "Let's get a closer look." Using a handheld drone, they launched the device from the railway ties at the top of the cliff. Its propellers whirred to life, and soon a live video feed flickered on their tablets. The camera hovered above the water, panning slowly. At first, the image showed nothing but rolling swells and shifting patterns of sunlight on the surface. Then the drone dipped lower, closer to the tip of the cove. "A scarp," Lauren breathed. "There, see that? The seabed has dropped off sharply. It must be the underwater fault line." Suddenly, the feed jerked violently as another swell arrived. The wave rose with dreadful slowness, its face smooth and unbroken, towering, silent, and pregnant with power. Then, with a popping distortion in the signal, the feed cut out altogether. Marcus slammed his fist on the tablet. Drones down. He looked at Kai. The Labrador was barking ferociously now, each bark a staccato alarm. As the ground beneath their feet trembled faintly, he led them back up the rocks, navigating obstacles with ease. Back atop the cliff, the entire crew was assembled. Rescue boats bobbed at the pier, their engines silent and ready. The town's emergency operations center had been activated. Police, fire, medical personnel all converging to coordinate evacuation. On the horizon, the sea surface was a vast, undulating highway, every wave a silent messenger of what was to come. "All right," Marcus said, turning to address the assembled teams. "We've got a scarp, an undersea cliff about here." He gestured to the map, laid across a folding table. "And the tremors are strengthening. That means the next swell could be the big one." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. Kai's warning gave us time. Let's make it count. All units, execute windward evacuation. Move civilians uphill and toward the east ridge. No exceptions. Behind him, Kai sat obediently, tongue lolling slightly, eyes glinting with bright intelligence. Though he could not speak in human tongues, his every action had spoken volumes. A canine sentinel whose fearlessness had rallied an entire community. As the first emergency vehicles roared past, lights flashing, Kai rose to his feet and trotted beside Marcus. Together, they began the long march through the waking town, past shuttered shops, silent homes, and the distant sound of sirens. And in that moment, Seahaven understood that courage sometimes comes on four paws, in the form of a single, steadfast hero, ready to face the gathering swell. The sun had barely crested the horizon when the horizon itself seemed to buckle, folding upon the world in a silent roar. From their vantage atop Cedar Hill, the townspeople of Seahaven watched the ocean transform. What had been a gentle, glassy plain now rippled with an unnatural intensity. Waves rose like dark monuments. Walls of water that glimmered in the morning light, then pitched forward with crushing inevitability. Marcus gripped Kai's leash with white-knuckled intensity, his eyes never leaving the advancing swell. Beside him, Lauren Vega barked orders into her radio, her voice calm but urgent. "All units, stand by for impact. Fire and police, seal off Lower Cove Road. Medical teams, prepare triage tents at the high school field. Repeat, triage tents at the high school field." Kai's hackles were raised. He strained forward, claws digging into the damp earth, every muscle coiled like a spring. Though he could sense the danger before any human instrument detected it, he did not bark. He simply stared, his golden eyes ablaze with foreknowledge. At exactly 6:27 a.m., the first wave struck. It hit Lower Cove like a battering ram, smashing through the protective breakwater with a thunderclap of shattered concrete and cascading foam. In that instant, the world seemed to tilt. A wall of swirling, frothy water surged inland, swallowing boardwalks, street lamps, and parked cars, as if they were driftwood. Screams crackled across radio frequencies. The wave advanced faster than some of the slower-moving evacuation teams could retreat, its brine-scented breath ragged and hungry. Marcus lunged forward, tugging Kai behind him, and sprinted down the rocky incline that led to the old lighthouse platform. Beneath his boots, stones skittered loose, but he scarcely noticed. They were secondary to the roaring deluge. Lauren was already sprinting in the opposite direction, bounding from boulder to boulder as the tide swirled around her ankles. "Get back!" she shouted to a pair of volunteers who'd paused for a last sweep of the beach, reluctant to abandon their posts. But these volunteers heeded the warning. They turned on their heels and scrambled after her, boots slipping on slick rock. Kai, meanwhile, broke free of Marcus's grasp and darted toward the cresting wave, not out of bravado, but from a singular sense of duty. He slipped into the knee-deep water that lapped against the lighthouse base, ears flattened and tail stiff. Instinctively, he tracked a dark shape caught in the foam. A lone kayak, its paddler tossed overboard some distance back, clinging to the hull with numb arms. With a single powerful leap, the Labrador splashed toward the stranded survivor. Each bound sent spray into the air, droplets catching the early light like diamonds. The kayak paddler, disoriented and bleeding from a gash on his forehead, looked up in stunned relief as Kai's head emerged beside him. Gently, the dog took the kayak's stern with his teeth and began towing it toward a rock outcrop just above the wave's reach. Above them, Marcus and Lauren watched with bated breath. Then, as the water receded with a tremendous roar, exposing a litter of debris and broken boards, Marcus raised his arm in triumph. A second later, he and Lauren had clambered down to help pull the paddler, shivering, shaken, but alive, out of the water. Kai stayed alert, eyes scanning the retreating swell for any other signs of distress. The first wave had lasted less than a minute, but in its wake lay a battlefield of uprooted fences, overturned picnic tables, and scattered trash. The smell of salt and gasoline from a ruptured fuel tank mingled in the air, a pungent reminder that this was no ordinary storm. Marina docks were twisted metal, boats half submerged like drowned creatures. "Status?" Marcus asked into his radio, voice gravelly. "Lower Cove Road flooded up to Main Street," crackled an urgent reply. "No casualties reported yet, but multiple structural collapses. Triage is standing by." As rescue crews fanned out, Kai raced along the edge of the water, nose to the ground. He paused at a shattered fence where pieces of driftwood formed a crude shelter, and beneath it, huddled against the remains of a picnic table, was a small boy no older than 8. The child's eyes were wide with fear, tears streaking the sand on his cheeks. Kai's bark was low and reassuring. He nosed forward gently, then pressed his body against the boy's shivering form. The child reached out, wrapping trembling arms around the Labrador's neck. Within seconds, Marcus and Lauren arrived, Lauren scooping the boy into her arms, while Marcus swept room for any other survivors. "Good boy," Marcus murmured, scratching Kai behind the ears. "You found him." The boy, voice quivering, managed to whisper, I thought I lost my dad." "Let's get you to the medics," Lauren said softly. "You're safe now." While the emergency teams carried on with tireless precision, Kai trotted back to Marcus, chest heaving, tail wagging in weary satisfaction. He had braved the surge without hesitation, guided by that same instinct that had led Sea Haven's defenders to safety. As the tide receded further, revealing the true extent of the devastation, the people of Sea Haven climbed the slopes of Cedar Hill to witness the aftermath. They saw shattered remains of sun-faded lifeguard stands, half-submerged storefronts, and the twisted skeleton of an amusement pier jutting from the water like a broken promise. Yet among the ruins, there were pockets of hope. Volunteers distributing blankets, neighbors helping neighbors pull debris from doorways, and rescuers ferrying the injured to safety. And standing at the top of the hill, surveying the battered shoreline, was Kai. His golden fur matted, his muzzle flecked with sea spray, but his posture as proud and fearless as ever. He lifted his head toward the brightening sky, and in that moment, Sea Haven knew that though the sea had struck with terrible force, it had never claimed the town's spirit. For as long as Kai and his fellow guardians stood watch, no wave, no matter how monstrous, could wash away the courage of those who faced the deep. By midday, the roar of the sea had faded to a distant rumble, leaving Sea Haven's shoreline strewn with debris and the heavy hush of stunned recovery. Under the brilliant glare of an unseasonably clear sun, rescue crews combed the wreckage of bleached driftwood, broken umbrellas, and twisted metal. Volunteers in bright safety vests and gloves formed human chains to sift through sand-packed wreckage, calling out names as they searched for lost watches, wedding rings, and, most urgently, any remaining survivors. Kai moved among them with steady purpose, his damp coat glinting in the sunlight. He nosed under overturned picnic tables, pausing at each gasping breeze painted on a stranger's face. When his ears pricked, he would let out a soft, affirming bark, prompting the nearby volunteer to shine a flashlight into a cranny or reach beneath a collapsed boardwalk. Time and again, the Labrador's keen instincts guided hands to where bodies, human and animal alike, lay hidden beneath the ruin. And each time, he stood guard, muzzle lowered protectively until the stretcher or safe crate had whisked the rescued person or injured dog away. At the edge of the cove, where the first wave had spilled with catastrophic force, an impromptu field hospital had been erected. Tents fluttered in a light breeze, their red crosses stark against white fabric. Doctors and nurses in scrubs and masks worked in synchronized harmony. One team cleaned and bandaged wounds, another administered warm fluids and pain medication, while a third recorded names and medical histories. Beneath one tent flap, a huddle of frightened children clutched blankets, their wide eyes reflecting the swirl of activity. As Marcus carried in stretchers, Kai padded alongside, offering a gentle nuzzle to each recovering patient, a canine balm for shock and fear. Meanwhile, at Town Hall, Mayor Evelyn Ramirez presided over a triage of a different kind: gratitude lists and resource allocations. She and her staff had spent the morning fielding calls from state emergency agencies, coordinating supply drops of food, water, and temporary shelter materials. Through a window behind her desk, the old lighthouse stood as a silent sentinel, its angled shadow slicing across the green quad. Even in crisis, Sea Haven's storied landmark had become a symbol of resilience, much like the Labrador, whose steadfast bravery had rallied the town to safety. Back on the beach, Lauren Vega organized a perimeter team to mark unstable ground. With red tape and wooden stakes, they cordoned off areas where the sand had shifted, revealing hidden sinkholes and exposed rebar. Kai watched their progress with thoughtful eyes, but never ventured beyond the safe zones, as though respecting human judgment in matters of structural integrity. Yet whenever a gap opened in the tape, if a volunteer paused for water or to catch their breath, Kai would place himself between the hazard and the worker, broad shoulders and calm gaze serving as a living barrier. By late afternoon, the tide had receded far beyond its normal bounds, uncovering sections of the pier that had not seen daylight for decades. Fishing nets, long sunken boats, and time-worn driftwood lay exposed, testaments to the sea's hidden depths. Town historians and curious onlookers ventured onto the newly revealed dock, snapping photographs and marveling at relics from Sea Haven's earliest days. Some discovered Victorian-era glass bottles engraved with indecipherable figures. Others uncovered barnacle-encrusted lanterns, their ironwork twisted by age and water. At the waterline, Marcus knelt with Kai at his side, examining a piece of concrete blasted free from the breakwater. "This was supposed to protect us," he muttered, running a finger along its jagged edge. "But our real shield was you, buddy. You always were." Kai leaned into his hand, comfortable in the praise, but eager to return his attention to the task at hand. The Labrador stood abruptly, ears forward. In an instant, he was moving, fast and silent, toward the east ridge, where the sirens that had blared earlier were now reverberating against the hills. Marcus jogged after him, heart pounding. At the crest, they found a volunteer firefighter standing beside an open command vehicle, speaking into a handheld radio. "We've got power lines down near Windjammer Road," the firefighter reported. "Live current, dangerous. We need that cleared before dark." Marcus signaled to Lauren, who joined them with a pair of utility workers, hauling insulated gloves and heavy-duty cutters. As the team set about isolating the wires, Kai nosed at the ends of the fallen cables, then backed up and sat as if to say, "Proceed with caution." The workers chuckled at first, then fell silent, realizing the wisdom in his stance. One of them lifted his helmet and patted Kai gently. "All right, boy, lead the way. But stay clear of the lines, okay?" When the tangled cables were finally secured and marked, the team climbed back into their truck and drove off, lights strobing in the gathering dusk. Marcus knelt beside Kai. "You're a regular guardian, you know that? Always watching our backs." Kai wagged his tail, then sniffed the breeze, ears swiveling. His attention was drawn back toward town, where relief trucks queued at the entrance, and townsfolk gathered on balconies, shouting thanks and applause. As the sky shifted to shades of rose and amber, a hush fell over Sea Haven. The distant sound of a church bell tolled 5 o'clock, calling the weary to rest and reflection. In the glow of twilight, the battered beach looked almost peaceful. The tide's retreat had smoothed away many scars, and glowing campfires dotted the dunes, where families shared blankets and hot meals provided by emergency kitchens. Kai, now free of his harness, wandered among the fires, accepting pats and grateful murmurs from survivors. He paused at one, where an elderly couple sat arm in arm, faces lined with relief. They held a framed photo, a picture of their granddaughter lost during the morning panic, now safe and asleep in a medic's arms inside a tent nearby. Recognizing the connection, Kai rested his chin on the woman's knee, drawing a soft smile from her lips. As evening settled in, Marcus and Lauren walked down the boardwalk, side by side. Their uniforms bore the stains of sand and salt water, but their shoulders were straight, their eyes bright with purpose. "We've done good today," Lauren said quietly. Marcus nodded, glancing back at Kai, who was chasing drifting bits of seaweed along the shore. "We have," he agreed, "but tomorrow we'll be just as vigilant. The sea doesn't rest, and neither can we." Under a sky freckled with stars, the Labrador's silhouette paused against the lapping waves. Ever watchful, ever faithful, reminding Sea Haven that true safety comes from the unbreakable bond between humanity and the courage that walks on four legs. The morning sun rose over Sea Haven like a benediction, casting long golden shafts of light across the newly restored boardwalk. Where only days before jagged drifts of debris and shattered planks had lain, now volunteers in matching blue t-shirts worked with hammers and sanders to smooth and seal the wood. The scent of fresh pine resin mingled with sea salt, a fragrant promise of renewal after the chaos of the tsunami's wrath. Marcus Bennett stood at the crest of Cedar Hill, shoulders squared against the brisk breeze. At his side, Kai, still bearing flecks of sand and seaweed in his golden coat, watched the town below with a measured calm. The Labrador's eyes, normally bright with curiosity, now held a serene wisdom earned through adversity. Marcus reached down to stroke Kai's head. "Ready for today's mission?" he asked softly. Kai answered with a contented wag of his tail, as though he knew this day would be different. Down below, the town's recovery had taken on a new rhythm. Early risers gathered at the temporary relief center, set up in the high school gymnasium. Long tables were laden with fresh fruit, sandwiches, and hot coffee, served by local cafe owners who'd reopened their kitchens for free. Inside, neighbors greeted one another with hugs, trading stories of narrow escapes and extraordinary kindness. A wall of gratitude had sprung up along one side of the gym, where people pinned homemade thank you notes and drawings for the rescue teams. Doctors, firefighters, police officers, and of course, Kai himself. By mid-morning, Mayor Evelyn Ramirez and the town council convened an open gathering on the lawn beside Town Hall. White folding chairs faced a podium draped in the town's banner, Sea Haven Strong. Kai lounged at the front row, leash held loosely by Lauren Vega, who had been instrumental in coordinating canine response protocols. Children clustered around him, patting his head and whispering thanks into his floppy ears. Behind them, a projector screen displayed photographs from the tsunami's aftermath. Battered lifeguard stands, overturned boats, and the lone kayak rescue. All vivid reminders of the stakes they had faced together. Mayor Ramirez approached the podium, microphone in hand. She glanced down at Kai, then out over the assembled townspeople. "Today," she began, voice clear and steady, "we honor not only the bravery of our first responders, but also the extraordinary instincts of one special hero." She gestured toward Kai. The crowd erupted in applause as Marcus quietly unclipped Kai's leash, allowing him to rise and accept pats and kisses from well-wishers. In the months ahead, the mayor continued, Sea Haven will invest in a new coastal safety initiative. We will install advanced early warning buoys, strengthen our seawalls, and expand our canine rescue program. Every member of our community, two-legged and four, played a part in surviving that terrible wave. And from this day forward, we will build a future that respects the power of the ocean and the courage that rises in the face of it. Following the speeches, volunteer teams dispersed to their assigned tasks. Some repaired roofs and replaced broken windows. Others surveyed the dunes, planting native grasses to stabilize sand and prevent erosion. A group of engineers distributed diagrams showing how the new sensor arrays would map underwater seismic activity, giving them precious extra minutes to evacuate in case of another quake. Marcus and Lauren accompanied a trio of eager recruits to the old lighthouse platform, where they installed a motion-activated alert beacon. Kai bounded ahead, nose to the ground, guiding them to the most exposed spot for maximum coverage. As the beacon clicked into place, Marcus activated its test signal. A soft alarm chimed through their radios and echoed faintly off the cliffs. "Looks good," he said, offering a reassuring pat to each recruit. "Yeah, this is the next line of defense." Meanwhile, the community's marine biology club, led by high school senior Sofia Torres, organized a shoreline cleanup. Armed with buckets and gloves, club members collected fragments of plastic and tangled fishing nets washed ashore. Kai trailed behind them, sniffing at each find, his gentle presence calming even the shyest volunteer. Sophia knelt beside him, whispering, "Thanks, Kai. You're making this world safer for all of us." As afternoon light softened, the recovery shifted to celebration. A block party unfurled along Main Street. Food trucks serving clam chowder and fish tacos lined the avenue, and local bands played on a makeshift stage. Children danced in a spray of mist from fire hoses, and elders sat in lawn chairs, swapping recipes and memories. At the center of it all, Kai lay contentedly under a shade tree, paws stretched out, head resting on his front legs. When the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the street, the mayor tapped her glass to call for calm. "Before we close," she said, I have one more honor to bestow. She reached down and retrieved a polished brass medal engraved with a paw print and the words, Sea Haven Sentinel. With solemn ceremony, she fastened it to Kai's collar. The crowd cheered as the Labrador rose to his feet, tilting his head to examine the shiny new emblem. Marcus knelt beside him, voice choked with pride. You kept us safe, he murmured. Because of you, we found our strength. Kai pressed his nose into Marcus's palm, then bounded off, drawn by a small child offering a stick to fetch. As twilight settled in, the town began to glow with lanterns strung between lampposts. Fire pits crackled on the sidewalks, and lantern-lit boats drifted at the pier in a silent flotilla of remembrance. Families stood at the water's edge, tossing flowers into the sea, a tribute to those they lost, and a prayer for the future. Kai, now back in Marcus's arms, watched the drifting lights sparkle on the water. Above, the first stars emerged in the velvet sky. In that tranquil moment, Sea Haven felt whole again. Scarred, perhaps, but united by a shared ordeal and the quiet heroism of one steadfast dog. For Kai, the day's labors had been joyful work. For Sea Haven, they were the first steps toward a renewed harmony with the sea. And as the final lantern faded into the horizon, the town slept with a new confidence, knowing that no matter what waves tomorrow might bring, they would always stand guard, shoulder to paw, against the vast, unpredictable depths.